The film is about a 17-year-old Syrian refugee girl and how her American dream, quite unlikely to become a doctor, is challenged more than it might have been, say, when Obama was president, because of the current political climate and the I would say, the outward bound racial discrimination against Muslims, and how her life, her experience right now, parallels the Japanese Americans who were interned during World War II. And there are fewer and fewer of those survivors, and most of them in their 90s now, unless they were quite young, in the camps. There were 13 camps in the United States, and I live in Idaho. I'm the only female filmmaker in Idaho. And that's how I was making another film about Idaho and saw this internment camp. And as I toured that particular film, Destination Idaho, went on NBC, and as I toured with the film, a lot of people that were under 35 said, I didn't know there were Japanese American internment camps. And the people that were over 35 mostly didn't know anything about them except that they existed. And so I've kind of felt as when Donald Trump became the presidential candidate, that it was imperative that I educate people how quickly history can repeat itself when we become historically amnesiac.
How did you find your subject, the Syrian 17-year-old?
This was interesting. I'm also a journalist, and I've spent a lot of time, I'm a war zone journalist, spent a lot of time in the Middle East. And we have a great festival in Boise, Idaho called Tree Fort. And she was on a student panel of refugees. She was only been in the United States 2 weeks, clearly suffering post-traumatic stress syndrome. And she struggled, and she was so brave, and she tried to communicate, please don't let the troops out. All Muslims are not bad. So many of my family are dead. We had nothing to eat. I'm so blessed to be here. And I adopted her essentially because I thought, this girl, she has potential. She represents what the American dream still is. I mean, she had that within her. And as I was in the process of 3 years of making this film, I saw how the headlines began to parallel exactly what I was seeing in these interviews, these tragic, beautiful, courageous people who suffered so much and lost everything. And they were American citizens.
So you got George Takei, for example, to interview, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So talk about approaching those individuals. I know George Takei's been very vocal about his history and his family's history. So what was like approaching him and getting him involved in the project?
When you're an independent filmmaker, everything depends on connections. It's who you know. And I can say that even going to film festivals for me is, at this point, after making 15 documentaries, is really about the connections, the other filmmakers I meet, the other producers, the other agents. And indeed, I had met another producer, Terry Sanders, and his wife, Frida Lee Mock. And they have won 2 Academy Awards in documentaries, one being A Clear Vision about Maya Lin. And so I had said to them when I started making this film, George Takei is so visible, and he's such a great advocate, social justice advocate for inclusion and diversity and gay rights. And so I said, I would love to have him in the film. And Terry turned to me and said, I shot his marriage ceremony with his husband, and I know him really well, and of course they know my work. So when you make those kind of introductions,
right. That's
why my best advice to people is, if you start a film, finish it. I don't care if it takes you 10 years. Get it done, because that's how you establish credibility in this business and how people will help you.
Where can more people learn about the Japanese internment camps? Because when we think about World War II, it's all about the Holocaust. It's about Nazi Germany. A lot of history books do not touch on what we did. And where could people find out more about what happened to those Japanese citizens, our U.S. citizens at that time?
Well, first, of course, they can watch Bamboo and Barbed Wire when
Right.
It comes to a festival near them, and then it'll soon be streaming afterwards. But also, there's an organization, if you think back to Schindler's List and as well how they work together with UCLA to set up the archives for the Holocaust survivors.
The
so
Shoah
that you would go
Foundation.
there. Yes, right. Thank you. And then in Seattle, there's a man, Tom Ikeda, that did the Densho project, and he partnered with Microsoft presidents, and he has since archived thousands of hours of these survivors who have passed. It would be the number one place, free information, beautiful, touching, profound, courageous interviews by people that had this experience. You can learn everything at densho.org.
So you say you're a journalist in the war zones in the Middle East. You're a documentary and filmmaker. When making this documentary, what did you learn about yourself that you did not know?
First of all, I was somewhat ashamed when I discovered the camp, because I didn't know there was a camp in Idaho. And what I learned about myself is that I need to be. This is the biggest challenge. It's clear from the way I present myself, I'm a liberal. But after 15 films, I know I'm not, and I don't aspire to be Michael Moore. I don't need to prove a point. When I say I'm a humanitarian filmmaker, I want to tell everyone's viewpoint. And I thought, so the point of this film is not to preach to the people who would agree with me that there are political parallels, but to reach the people who think that there should be a Muslim ban, that there should be a wall, and to understand their point of view. And how could I, in fact, this was one of the things with Ruth Bader Ginsburg in the film. I was so excited to have her. I said, I'm gonna put her right up front. And then I thought, if I do that, she's such a liberal icon that every conservative who begins to watch this film will say, I'm not gonna watch this film. I already know what it's about. And it's the us and them mentality. And I had to learn to look through that lens and say it's all us. That's what we're supposed to be. That's what America is. And that's what this little girl, Lubna, in my film kept reminding me. And so I thought, as a journalist, I had a moral obligation to make a human story that touched people on a human level instead of on a political level.
What I love about documentaries is not only the learning aspect about learning something new, but taking action. You obviously took action by adopting this 17-year-old girl. What could we do as citizens of the United States and as humans? What can we do to help these refugees get through this process? And, beyond writing letters to Congress, which, obviously it's not helping at this point, what could we do as citizens?
I think what this film, all of my films talk about, is being an upstander. An upstander is looking at people as human beings, and when you see something where someone's civil liberties are being compromised, realize that what our country stands for is civil liberties for everyone, and be an upstander from that point of view. Be a human and educate yourself, because the information is available. And one of the things that was most interesting about that I decided to do with this film is I don't know much about, even though I've been embedded with the Special Forces, I didn't know much about the military aspect of the internment. And I focused a lot on the 442nd in this film, which was a Japanese-American unit, the most highly decorated unit to this day. And that's how I got George involved, is he became very involved with them as well.
What did you learn about this unit?
Well, the most incredible point to make, the moral outrage that I really suffered when I found out that while these people, their families were interned, they were put in the most dangerous situations, and to become, to this day, for their size, still the most decorated unit, they sacrificed to prove their loyalty with their lives. And they would have to come back to the camps in military uniform after risking their lives they had 80% mortality rates, to see their families who were still interned. Can you imagine? This is America.
You've been to this film festival a couple times. You told me that you interviewed Gina way before that this film festival kicked off. So what does it mean to you to have a premiere here at this film festival and to kind of bring it home for you?
It is. I love this festival. And I love this festival because I knew Gina because I made a film, Girl from God's Country, on the history of women in film, and had interviewed Gina about gender bias in Hollywood in 2014 before they had even started Bentonville. And when they did, it just so happened that I was in post-production, and so we ended up here for the inaugural year. But to come back, well, first of all, I love the catfish here.
It's awesome.
And the bourbon's not bad either. But because remember, I live in Idaho.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that as the festival grows, this is a fluid festival. The number one thing I tell filmmakers is this festival is about the filmmakers. In many festivals that you and I have talked about and we've all been to, you just get lost unless you're a celebrity or a celebrity attached to your film. And here, they know the struggle. They know the struggle is real to make a film as an independent, and they treat us with such respect, and we feel honored and recognized for the work that we do, and we know that our films are important and they support the message.
So you're a journalist, you've been, journalist for many years. We're seeing a lot of women get into journalism. We're starting to see on all the cable networks and television networks a lot more women. So what would your advice be for someone who's 17, 18, 19 years old, who's graduating high school here in a few weeks, going off to college? What would you say to them about getting into journalism? What would advice be?
That's a great question. When we went through the blue carpet the first night, there was a young set, two girls that were working for the local high school. They've been coming since they were 15. They started really, truly by stuffing envelopes, and that night they were allowed to be there with cameras for the first time at the blue carpet, and I went right to them. I work with an all-female crew, right down to my composers and my musicians, and so I went right up to those young ladies and I said, this is the place to start. Get a camera, get out there, don't stop. And she was standing behind the barrier, and I said, come with me. If you're a journalist, you're going to have to learn to push the rules a little bit.
That is so awesome. What's next for this film? Obviously, it's premiering here at Bentonville, but what's also next for you professionally?
I'm actually, right now, currently, as a filmmaker, I'm in the middle of production on a new film for Harvard called Voices from the Field on global health, an incredible innovation that's saving millions of women's lives in the third world. And then I'm in pre-production on a film, 2020 is the 100-year anniversary of women's suffrage. And I'm working with the state of Idaho to produce Idaho Women 100 on the anniversary, because Idaho was the fourth state in the union to allow women to vote.
So no sleep for you, maybe some food, right?
Maybe some bourbon and catfish.
That's awesome.